good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again a leading force.
Hi, Don. So speak up a little bit there, and we'll be ready to go. Let me just get your volume up a bit, if you don't mind. Yeah, I can barely hear you. Let me just, wait, no, that's better. All right, thank you very much.
Sure, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Okay, here we are. Charles Moscowitz, thanks for joining me, everyone, live Monday through Friday, Eastern Standard Time, at all of the various venues and platforms that are carrying the program, and that number is expanding. I want to welcome aboard Sprecher today. Is my latest venue. Don Jeffries is my guest, and Don is the author of many interesting books here. Don, you've got a whole shelf of books, including Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics, Survival of the Richest, Crimes and Cover-ups. You started out as a researcher working with Mark Lane for the Kennedy assassination, he being one of the classic, and I think really one of the first significant people to really start to open that case up in the 1970s, I believe. And so, Don, I mean, obviously we have to start out by talking about the most significant story of our day and the most significant story of every 4 years, which is the inauguration of a new president and vice president of the United States. I congratulate President Biden and Vice President Harris. Even though I may be in the loyal opposition, I wish them well because I wish the country well. I'll criticize them when they're wrong and I'll praise them when they're right. I will continue to insist that the election was stolen, and I'm not going to stop talking about that. I'll continue to research it because if we don't get to the bottom of that, we're never going to have another free election. However, having said that, I do recognize them as president and as vice president of the United States. I'm not going to do the left-wing thing about saying, you know, he's not my president and that kind of thing. So, Don, I'd like you to reflect on these issues in your mind today.
Well, yeah, we were living in surreal times. I also write science fiction, and I'm still trying to get more of my fiction. I've had much better success with my nonfiction, but I like apocalyptic fiction. It's hard to write now because we're kind of living through something that's stranger than fiction. So right as we speak, it's about 12 o'clock p.m. So right now, Biden is supposed to be inaugurated. So there are still probably millions of Americans out there that are literally expecting a last-second effort from Trump or somehow manipulating from Florida or wherever he is to turn the troops on Biden or whatever on the deep state. I don't know, but
no.
It's obviously not going to happen. But it's what's most interesting is what's going to happen after. I've talked about this many times. What will happen after Trump to both sides? Because what's left, and the left is where I should be, and I'm not welcome there now because these people are just absolutely insane. You can't have a conversation with people that think they're 57 genders. I don't know how you can't reason with them. So those are the people that have taken over the left. And so there is no, if Mark Lane was alive today, as you mentioned, my mentor, a civil libertarian, he wouldn't, I don't know what he'd be doing. He certainly wouldn't be with him, I don't think. And as a civil libertarian, I believe in free speech. They don't. And, they're talking about, they may want to prosecute who knows how many people that were Trump supporters, which is just unbelievable to me. But what will happen after Trump? I suspect that Trump will continue to be on the periphery, will hold rallies and just same stuff he did while he was office, basically, tweet if he ever gets back to tweeting and not do anything, which was his presidency. But if he somehow decides to do, what would be more, I think, rational, to just leave it all behind and a billionaire, I don't know what the left will do without him because they have made him. They've made him there. I've compared him many times to Emmanuel Goldstein in Orwell's 1984, where he was the fake opposition leader, and they would put his face on screen, and the party members would go every day, and they'd have a 2-minute hate. And only with Trump, it's 24/7 hate. So without their Goldstein, I don't know. Maybe they may transfer the hatred onto all the supporters, but that's 75 million people. I don't know how you can do that. But maybe they'll do that. And of course, the right is completely lost now because they put all their apples into one basket. They went after this. They bought into this personality, and the whole Q thing. Most of the biggest podcasts that I've been on over the years were Q centric people because they had the biggest fan base by far.
Right, for sure.
And so and I don't know what they're going to do because so many of these are good people, but they bought into it. They're vested into it. Obviously, the plan is gone. There were no arrests. There were no sealed indictments. There were no perp walks. It's ludicrous to still, but I don't know. Maybe they're somehow going to maintain it with Biden in office, but I don't know how you go on because Trump, his personality completely took over and transformed American politics, made it all about him. So with him gone, I hope the left, a lot of my friends in the JFK assassination community especially, regain their sanity and realize that George W. Bush isn't a good guy, and the intelligence agency shouldn't be trusted because that's what they did, because they went against Trump. So as long as you went against Trump, you were cool. And I've said, I've been on the record that I think that if Adolf Hitler could come back today and just walk around American society, he could literally anything. He would redeem his reputation completely. All he'd have to do is criticize Trump and say Trump was horrible.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I think that the this cult of Trump haters is so over the top and so bizarre that you're right. I mean, I had the same thought maybe a week ago when I was thinking, what are they going to do now if Trump's leaving town? I mean, where is their entire existence seems to be based upon building up this hate. And in fact, we could even more broadly say that that's what the left does. I mean, they have to have an enemy to hate. That's why Adolf Hitler picked the Jews, because he was a good communistic leftist. And in order to advance their agenda, whatever it may be, they need to have an object to vent their spleen on. And I don't know what they're going to do now that President Trump has retired. I mean, I've heard rumblings that they're going to continue to investigate him. The New York Attorney General, whose entire career seems to be focused on getting Trump, they're investigating, him, every family member, every business, anyone who ever was seen with him in a hotel lobby, is going to be investigated in New York State. And I think that more troubling than that, and that's just, they'll chase him down right to the grave. I mean, they're going to try to put him in jail. I mean, is the fact that they very well may, and in fact, there's evidence that they're going to go after anyone who's ever supported President Trump. And that includes me. And we're going to be censored. We're going to be marginalized. They came up with this final narrative that somehow he was responsible for an insurrection, which means that he's a terrorist, and as are we all. And in spite of the fact that more and more evidence is coming out that, as I said a week before the rally in Washington that it was going to be threaded with Antifa people dressed in Trump garb. That doesn't matter. The fact is they're going to stick with this was their final denouement, their final lie. That as he's leaving the door, their final attempt to try to take him down, and by extension, all of the rest of us. Now, having said all this, I want to be clear. I recognize Joe Biden as the president of the United States and Kamala Harris as the vice president of the United States. They've been sworn in. I respect our Constitution. I respect our system of government. I am moved by it, actually. I feel proud that we have gone through another transfer of power peacefully and that everything went peacefully. I'm grateful for that. And I think that is the hallmark of the greatness of our nation. We haven't had violent revolutions. We haven't had coups d'etats, at least not in the violent sense. We could argue whether or not Trump won, and I do believe he did by an overwhelming margin. However, Biden is now president, and I recognize it. Having said that, I do think we have to continue to investigate the election fraud. We have to get rid of the Dominion voting machines. I don't care if they say that they were not problematic. We can't have electric voting. That's too open to fraud. Most countries in the world have not done it, and they've gotten rid of it. And we have to do it the old-fashioned way. We have to have people, observers on both parties in the open, sitting at a table with the media there, counting every single vote so that this doesn't happen again. And we have to have national ID.
And you have to, Europe, because I'm calling America now the wealthiest banana republic the world's ever seen. I think we're totally third world. And our elections certainly are. If you look at the way Europe conducts their elections, they don't allow mail-in ballots.
Right.
And they require a photo ID. For obvious reasons.
Oh, in Mexico, you actually have to have a fingerprint when you go vote.
Yes, yeah. And a lot of these so-called third Venezuela, I talked to somebody that was at an election years ago, and I think it was Venezuela, or one of the nations down there, where they just simply, just to prevent people from voting more than once, they treated you like if you enter a bar. They just made you take a thumbprint, basically put your thumb in ink. So exactly. They would know you can't come back. It's a very simple precaution, but we apparently can't do that. But
well, we can't do it because we had this phony AstroTurf group funded by George Soros called the Brennan Institute that pushed this idea that somehow having voter ID meant you had something against black men and women.
It's racist, exactly. And it's so demeaning.
Itself is racist. What are they saying? A black person is not, this kind of like,
doesn't have an ID.
Yeah, this kind of paternalistic, old Rudyard Kipling white man's burden view of black people that somehow they're like children. Everybody can get an ID. They should be made free. I agree with that. In October, Nancy Pelosi salted into the COVID-19 stimulus bill. I think it was like several $1 billion for election reform. Fine. Out of that money, which all probably goes to the pockets of their friends, we could put in a little bit of money to make sure that every American can get a photo ID for free and make it easy and make it accessible. It's not brain surgery. It can be done.
Absolutely. And it's the idea that, and you're exactly right. And this is what I most fear about what's happening now is that we, because you end up like, I end up sounding like a white nationalist or something. And that's not my intention. But the problem is I am white. I have white children. I'll probably have white grandchildren one day. I don't want them growing up in a country where they're basically, figuratively sent to the back of the bus. And I think this is what is happening is that they're, when you have, the demeaning, the thing we can't say, and either stereotypes and generalization are wrong. As people like me, who I grew up a liberal, I used to listen to the speeches of Martin Luther King, and obviously I love the Kennedys. So I believe that stereotypes are wrong. That if you said, all blacks are stupid or all blacks are lazy or whatever, which a lot of people did back then,
right?
It wasn't right to demean a whole race. But the problem is now, of course, you can't say anything literally about, you can't say that a particular black is ugly, for instance, or something. Then somehow you're a racist. So but you can say whatever you want. about whites. And you don't have to say some whites. It's, like whites are racist, whites are this or that. It's like, so you're talking about generalizing there. Why is it okay for you to do that? I mean, it's the same thing where you're not going to get in trouble if you say, trailer park trash or white trash. That's fine. Perfectly acceptable. We saw that with Anderson Cooper, the CIA intern, who demeaned the entire crowd of Trump supporters by saying, "Oh, they're going to go back to eat at Olive Garden and go back to Holiday Inn." Now, just change that to a Black Lives Matter crowd, and what would have happened to a reporter that said, "Oh, they're going to go back to Popeye's fried chicken"? I mean, he would have been fired before he could drop the microphone. I mean, that's so.
Well, they base it on the idea of white privilege, and that somehow being white in this country gives you advantages, and that there's kind of secretive, sort of almost subconscious racial profiling of people who are not white. And I think there is some truth to that, but I think that the answer is not to do reverse racism. The answer is not to emphasize race identity, because different people relate to their race or non-race in any way they want. And that this whole business of the kind of the microaggression theory, which is really used as a weapon against anyone that's not on the left, that it's basically fanning the flames of racial division, and that maybe it very well may lead to a white supremacist backlash among probably more poor white men, younger men who feel disenfranchised and who feel shut out, and who feel that they're getting opportunities taken away from them. And I wonder if the whole enterprise isn't being deliberately set up that way to create division. We've always heard about how the Russians back in the Kremlin times, and even probably today, and how communism tries to sow division and anger and conflict in a society that they target. In fact, this is what communism is: class conflict. Instead, they replaced class conflict with race conflict. You had who was the philosopher? Frantz Fanon, the Marxist philosopher from Barbados, I think, who wrote the book called "The Wretched of the Earth," where he said in the 1960s that the new paradigm, the new dialectic for communism would not be class conflict, but race conflict, and that so we have an agenda here which is going to exacerbate, which forces people to identify themselves based upon race, which is a false construct anyway. And then once they do so, it pits them against each other. So we have to reject both sides, but we also have to take a look at the motive, who benefits, what is the motivation behind that kind of thing. But bringing things back to the election, again, I think that this idea that somehow voter ID is racist, that's racist. That's setting up a false paradigm, because everyone can get a basic ID so that we can ensure a principle that it used to be advocated by the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which is one man, one vote. Wasn't that what the Voting Rights Act was supposed to be all about in 1965?
Yeah, that's the entire. I draw these analogies over and over again to the old left, where that rightly, obviously objected first of all to, in the 50s, you had the witch hunt, where people were going after calling people commies and fellow travelers and reds and pinkos and all that. And it wasn't McCarthy that did that, by the way. It's historically inaccurate. That was the House Un-American Activities Committee, which nobody talks about.
Which was a House committee, and McCarthy was a senator. And by the way, let's just touch on that a little bit, just for historical accuracy.
Okay.
The House Un-American Activities Committee, which is actually called the House Committee on Un-American Activities, it was set up in the late 1930s by Congressman Dick Stein and Congressman McCormick of Massachusetts to look at Nazis that had infiltrated the government. And then after Pearl Harbor and after the United States became embroiled in World War II, the emphasis shifted to communists, both of which were involved in espionage and subversion inside the United States. It was just that simple. It had nothing to do. Joe McCarthy came around later.
Right. But the thing was that even the terminology that the right used in those days. I mean, I've seen people call Trump supporters subversives. The traitors thing is thrown around constantly.
And terrorists. I mean, I've been,
terrorists. Yeah, it's the exact same thing. And they're and not only that, you have on that front. It's unbelievable to me that these are the people that, and it's the exact same people that rightly wanted us not to go to war with the Soviet Union. Now they're chanting Russia, Russia, Russia. They're demonizing the same group when they're not running half the world.
It's the new Red Scare, and it's probably. It was the biggest deliberate conspiracy theory of our times. You know, people criticize you, Don, as an author. They've criticized me as being, you know, like tin hat conspiracy. Talk about conspiracies. I mean, this was a officially sanctioned and promoted conspiracy theory that was about as weird as any that had been coming along the pike. And basically what it comes down to is the accusation that Donald Trump was spying for Russia. Completely, utterly ridiculous and false. They spent, $40 million basically, putting people up against the wall and throwing them in prison for things that had not, and just terrorizing, frankly, an administration that was trying to proceed with the business it was elected to do and trying to hobble it. And that's what it was all about. It was really unbelievable.
Well, the first state-sanctioned conspiracy theory you've ever had, and this is the people. It's unbelievable to me when you have the establishment media promoting something. And I wrote many articles about this for the American Free Press, which I write for regularly. But so you not only had that, but you also have. I pointed this out many times. What the new left, or whatever the woke left, whatever they want to call themselves, the social justice warriors. They are also turning. They are basically the anti-civil rights movement. What they're doing now, they're turning civil rights. I mean, when you do things like run people out of restaurants, as they did to Sarah Huckabee Sanders and others, and the restaurant owner ran her out. And I said, the whole civil rights movement wasn't the purpose behind that. Is that the private business doesn't have a right to deny someone the right to eat there at the restaurant because of how they look. And that was the whole idea.
Now you have Harvard talking about rescinding the diplomas of people who were publicly supporting President Trump. And you've got, what do you think is going to happen with that, Don? Do you think that there really is going to be a major witch hunt? I mean, we already have seen the Parler app taken down. I mean, I think it's coming back, but it had nothing to do with anybody in breaching the Capitol. It was a conservative site that was competing with the big tech, particularly Twitter. Right. And Twitter got together and conspired, I understand, with Google and Apple to take them down. And it was a huge website. It had picked up beyond Twitter even. And then, of course, they have censored the president of the United States, Donald Trump, who had, I think, probably 10, 20 million followers. They simply took him down and did so to a lot of other people. I mean, even taking down Parler. You're talking about people who had accounts on Parler and Twitter where they had hundreds of thousands of followers. Now they have been censored. No one is going to hear them now. It's like they've disappeared into the memory hole. Right. You talk about George Orwell. I mean, this is complete censorship.
And the same argument is used there. The left suddenly loves free enterprise because they thought, well, there's a private company. They don't have rights to. Okay, well then, restaurants are private companies. Stores are private companies. I don't want black people in here. Is that okay? Well, I mean, the analogy is the same. Why can't they do that when they can say, well, they're disproportionately represented in crime rates. So that's why I'm not going to have them. They might steal. And we'd recognize that you can't do that. But to say, well, I don't want you on Twitter because you might say something hateful. You might inspire somebody. I mean, you either have free speech or you don't. But the left doesn't want free speech. And the left today, people like Mark Lane, Nat Hentoff, and other great civil libertarians, William O. Douglas, the last great Supreme Court justice we had, they would not recognize, not to mention the JFK and RFK, Martin Luther King, they would not recognize today's left. And they'd all be smeared, like I said, by his own words. Martin Luther King is a white supremacist by saying judge people by the content of their character. Because you all aren't doing that. And JFK said race has no place in American life or law. So,
Exactly. The whole idea of transcending race and focusing on people's accomplishments, that in and of itself, I think they would probably call racist, as if somehow black people aren't accomplished. Who's really the racist? But here we are now with the new administration. We've talked about censoring opinions, which is really ugly in this country and which is something that should be troubling everybody. What else do you think we can expect from this establishment? Do you think that I don't think Joe Biden as a person is all that strong. I think he's elderly, and I don't think he has full command of his faculties. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that as an observation. So that tells me that there are going to be people around him who are going to be calling the shots. Do you think that that's going to include people? Are they going to go far left? Are they going to go like Sandy Orquez, whatever her name is, and start to, put together, enemies lists and have people prosecuted and not allowed to have, jobs? They're talking about anybody associated with the Trump administration not allowed to get, get into positions.
Talking about blacklisting,
it could be worse, and it could get worse. What do you think is going to happen with all that?
Well, I'm obviously frightened of that prospect, but I hope, if history holds true, that rhetoric will not turn into reality. Now, but I don't know. The fact that people are proposing some of these things is mind-boggling. But I think our only hope is because, again, the Republicans being the stupid party that they are, I think the Republican Party is dead, by the way. There'll never be another Republican president. And they'll be marginalized to the point where hopefully another party, and hopefully it's populist libertarian, will fill the void. But as it stands right now, they're no opposition to what is the one. Basically, we are in Orwell's one party. There's a party in power. And the opposition is loyal opposition. There's very few of them opposed to it. They want to get rid of the Josh Hawley types that that actually showed some promise because he spoke up against electoral fraud. So I hope, though, you mentioned AOC and people and the Squad, people like that. I hope that the more radical ones in the Democratic Party, hopefully they'll form their own gridlock with the old guard, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chucky Schumers and people like that. I'm hoping, but I don't know. But you had the old-fashioned jealousy. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi wants to be large and in charge, and she may resent AOC and the younger people getting the press and acting like they're in charge. So I'm hoping they have the fight against themselves, but that's really our only hope, because I heard today that where I fear this reparations nonsense, which is just going to talk about exacerbating the divide in this country. Not to mention it's about as absurd an idea and unjust idea as possible. There's a guy in Oregon who has introduced a bill in Oregon. Keep in mind, Oregon was always a free state. No history with slavery, none. He's introducing a bill to give every the African Americans in their state. Now supposedly they're going to have to prove their ancestry from slavery. I don't believe that. $120,000 a year until they die. This is, and some of these people complain about welfare and wanting to help people that really need help. And you're going to give people $120,000 a year just because they're black? And if that isn't divisive, what is it? And so if something like that passes, you can certainly look for California and New York, the most woke states.
I suppose we could have people have blood tests to find out how much black ancestry they have. Right? It's going to be like, what is going to be the one drop theory?
It's the same thing. They're going to use the same thing.
It's almost eugenics.
It's crazy. Maybe they'll have a sliding scale of reparations where, you're half black, so you got to have, it's mind-boggling. How is that, how is it supposed to bring the country together when you're calling Trump supporters and Trump, divisive for complaining about the election, but you're impeaching him again with a couple days left? That's not divisive.
That's going to be. Look, I think that you've illustrated pretty well, Don, the in a way the possible takeover by the Democrats of the far left and the possible takeover of the Republican Party by the right. I think that actually is not a bad thing, in that we really will have a great ideological difference between the two parties. And if the Democrats are controlled by Bernie Sanders and the left, and they get rid of the moderate Democrats and likewise Republicans, I find that interesting. I find that to be something that we actually can then have a real public debate in the public square. I do think that there is a movement in this country that actually transcends Democrat and Republican, that is nationalist, populist, traditionalist, libertarian, and conservative. And it's kind of a coalition of those groups. and that the conservative side has always been much more diverse ideologically, anyways. And I think that could eventually, that may be forming a new party. I don't know, or just to get rid of the Mitt Romneys. I mean, you saw like
Yes.
you had a couple of the rhinos actually vote for impeachment,
Yeah.
and in the case of Lynn Cheney in Wyoming, she is now going to be primaried. I mean, she's being vilified. The party there has never seen such a reaction, and I think that could be actually a good thing, in that the Republican Party will either come to stand for several things that are real, or they will have to be, they'll go the way of the Whigs, and maybe we'll have the new populist party or something. And likewise with the Democrats, they'll get rid of the Pelosi's. They will move. Now let's talk a little bit about Don Jeffries, what you think is coming down the pike in terms of the new Biden-Harris administration. And before we do that, let me give out the phone number. This is an open lines program. We do take calls. We take them live. Please observe community standards when you call. If you don't, I'm going to hang up very quickly. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. You're welcome to join myself, Charles Moscowitz, and my guest, Donald Jeffries, who is the author of a whole shelf of books at Amazon. So, Donald, what do you see coming up in terms of the new administration right out of the gate?
Well, again, I don't see anything good. As you say, I would support it. Anybody. That's the way I treated Trump. But I couldn't have lower expectations in terms of it. I think that everything being pushed on Biden, and as you noted, I don't think Biden's in control. He's probably less in control than any president we've ever seen, simply because he appears to have, I don't know if it's dementia or whatever.
Right.
I mean,
he's not playing
almost
with,
80 years.
He's playing, not playing with a full deck.
Right. So he's got a very aggressive and ambitious vice president behind him. He's going to have a people around him that are the usual suspects. I mean, I've seen them, and none of them are good appointees. But to be fair, none of Trump appointees were good either. So, but they usually aren't. They appoint the same kind of CFR types that are career people that are indoctrinated into the globalists.
Yeah.
So that's what they're good. But we have to hope that it just turns into if it's just what Obama did, because Obama was mostly sound and fury, signified nothing as well as Trump, not quite as much, but he certainly didn't do anything really outlandish until near the end, DACA, that kind of thing. But other than that, if Biden does indeed give amnesty to all the illegal immigrants here, and that is, of all the disappointments of the Trump administration, by far the most disappointing. The fact that he didn't, that was our absolute last chance to close the barn door, because millions and millions, that's going to change the demographics officially in America, so that the Republican Party is voting itself into extinction with their lust for cheap labor. So you're going to do that. It's going to overtax the system, because these people are, and as I wrote about my book in Survival of the Richest, half of America, and that was 2017, it's gotten much worse now with the pandemic and everything, the lockdown and all this. Half of America had nothing then, less than 1% of the collective wealth, the bottom 50%. You have millions more people entering at the very bottom, which are what all these illegal immigrants are going to be. They're desperately poor. You're going to increase that bottom 50%. And you bring migrants in, you're going to increase that. You bring more H-1B visa workers, which again, Trump promised to end. Instead, the Senate voted unanimously last month to lift all caps on countries with H-1B foreign visa workers. You have millions less
Well, that's
workers.
going to hurt American, not just American labor, but American professional development. I mean, people who invested in this country and who went to college and spent, and got careers. Right. They're going to have to compete with people coming in from India and China who will be hired because they're cheaper. I mean, so
it's all about the lust for cheap labor, and it's amazing to me that the Republicans especially are so short-sighted to not see what the long-term problem with this is. And so what is happening is, because you have 20% at the top that is doing really well, including obviously the 1% is just doing imaginable, but there's 20% that are the professionals that manage this mess that do really well. The 80% below struggle in varying degrees. The bottom 50% has nothing. So that leaves you with about 30% that's barely clinging to what used to be America, the middle class. And that's what they're desperately squeezing out. That's why the lockdown was so devastating, because they got rid of so many mom and pop businesses, which is what they want. I mean, the fact that they didn't tell Walmart and Target and Home Depot, they were open the entire time, selling the same products as the 5 and 10 cent store that at point, almost gunpoint, was said, no, you cannot open. And when they tried to open up, you can see what happened. They set the cops in, they tried to prosecute them. And nobody questions it. You know, what if it's dangerous for a small store to be open? How is it not dangerous for a much bigger store with a much larger group of shoppers?
Although let me just interject here. I've heard that Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York and Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago, both liberal Dems, are calling for the immediate reopening of their cities and their states now that the political situation has been resolved. Now that Trump has been driven out of office and sent home, now they suddenly want to reopen, which, by the way, shows a really great venality. The fact that they might have, and I'm not saying they did, but that they might have actually extended the shutdown just for political reasons, to try to hurt the economy, to try to hurt Trump. I mean, how many people were hurt by that? How many suicides? How many children who had their education interrupted, and depression and people not getting proper medical treatment and all the rest, just so they could get Trump out of office? If that's true, and I think that it probably is true.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's, I mean, I've written a lot about the. It was obviously, I think, a planned thing. That's why we call it a plandemic. And but so with everything that's happened, the country has been transformed so much within the last year because of that. Because of the fact that Charles, that they can do something like what we saw last summer. And I keep trying to throw examples, videos, words back into the faces of these people, my former friends on the left, and you cannot reason with them when I talk about, okay, look, I mean, you can look at Nancy Pelosi and all these other AOC, all of them saying these protests were necessary. Chris Cuomo, during the summer, Chris Cuomo says, whoever said that protests have to be nonviolent? And these are the exact same people.
I know, talk about insurrections. I mean,
yes.
This is, last summer they were there looting black businesses, burning black neighborhoods, and killing black people, and all in the name of civil rights. And President Trump tried to call out the National Guard, but I mean, he was so roundly criticized for doing that there were calls to have him put in prison for this. So he backed down. Now all of a sudden they've got 6,000 troops in Washington. I mean, it's sort of like
and you have if you look at the video of the so-called insurrection at the Capitol, if you look at that, there are videos out there for anyone to see of the police waving people inside, going in, basically escorting them in.
Well, we can revisit that one. I mean, I think that there were people, as the president might have said, there were people on both sides on that.
Oh, sure. I mean, and there were people that
I think the vanguard, the real activists, the ones who really were breaking down windows and were Antifa people, like this guy John Sullivan, and he was working completely along with that CNN photographer and journalist, and and I think that Trump people followed them in, and including Proud Boys and the people dressed in all kinds of outfits, and you had some weird kind of the Q people and people involved in the Lizards people conspiracy and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And it just turned into a motley mess. But I think at the end of the day we'll see who really were the main instigators.
Yeah, I mean,
but going back to the question of what's happening now, my understanding is that the new president is going to be signing a whole flock of executive orders undoing things that President Trump had done, and some of them are pretty troubling. Getting rid of the Keystone Pipeline. For the first time in modern American history, this country was energy independent. We did not depend on foreign oil. And it was a big part of the boom that occurred in the Trump years. Are we now going to go back to this kind of dependence and interaction with international oil interests? This is like it's really short-sighted. Also, I believe that he is stopping any further construction on the border wall, and this is happening at a time when caravans are forming in Central America, moving north, and they're chanting Biden, 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 and we're going to go back to the time when you have a huge incursion of illegal aliens in this country and not registered, bringing with them crime, drugs, everything else. And so, these are really significant developments. I think he's also undoing he's rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, which is nothing but a big fat payoff to international bureaucrats. It doesn't do a damn thing to reduce carbon in the atmosphere. It's sort of we're going to be re-entangling ourselves into the new world order. Whatever they want to call it, the Great Reset, they're calling it now.
Yeah, well, I think that anything Biden does will almost certainly 99.9% be something bad. And America is so already, we're at the precipice. Just what has happened in the last year. 4 years of Trump, which were raised expectations, false hopes, bringing the roaches out. Trump did serve to bring the roaches out into the light. So people that are awake anyhow saw the extent of the corruption. And
he didn't do a good enough job. He did not. We found out that they were so embedded in his own administration, even in his own White House,
right?
That he really didn't do that. That's I criticize Trump for that. Even though he went a long way, and he accomplished a lot in spite of them. They still were there sabotaging him at every step of the way, spying on him, dropping a dime on him. It was just horrible.
And his presence, but just his presence served to bring these people out into the light. And the lockdown served to make American realize just how horrible the leadership is at all levels. Because nobody knew who Lori Lightfoot was before, or the transgender guy from Pennsylvania who's now going to be some big position in
and by the way, if I can,
cabinet.
This being Levine, I think Marjorie Levine or somebody.
Levine, yes.
And let me just say, the issue with him is that during the lockdown, when certain blue state governors, like in this case Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania, were putting COVID-19 active people in nursing homes, which to my way of thinking is genocidal. And we should look at the fact that I think it's at least half of the deaths from COVID came from nursing homes, the most vulnerable population. They were doing that against federal guidelines. She removed her 95-year-old mother from a nursing home just before this policy went into effect. I hope that's brought up during the hearings. I would still like to hear an explanation from their governor, from Cuomo, from Whitmer of Michigan, and from Newsom of California, all of whom did this atrocious policy, and it was completely unnecessary. In New York, you had the medical ship, the naval vessel right off the coast in Manhattan Harbor empty. They could have easily put the COVID people in there. That's what they were there for. Instead, they put them in nursing homes.
And yet we were told, the hospitals were overflowing. They didn't know where to put the bodies, and yet they had that ship there that was empty. And you had Jason Goodman and lots of people going around New York filming in the empty hospitals. So I'm not sure where it was. And just like
they chose nursing homes where there was the most vulnerable people. It's one of these policies that I think there should be a reckoning. And meanwhile, Cuomo's shelves are groaning under the weight of all the awards he's getting.
Oh, he's an Emmy Award winner.
As a humanitarian. It's really... And, now that Biden's in office, I fear that all of this stuff is going to get swept under the rug. We're never going to see an end to, persecuting anyone who's really looking at corruption. And, it's just sad. The whole thing, look, again, I respect the fact that he is the president, and I'm loyal to this country because of out of that. But, we're returning to the time of mediocrity, of internationalism. We're no longer going to be putting the interests of our own nation first, and they're going to glorify in that. And it's sad. It's such a squandered opportunity that you have this guy like Trump coming out of nowhere and offering his services to the country and leading an incredibly successful administration by any metric. And he would have been twice as successful if he hadn't had to deal with all these conspiracies against him. And now we're going back to the rotten, old, mediocre days of Obama. I mean, Trump, as he was leaving, he made one comment that I think is really illustrative, in that he pointed out that, he should be credited with creating the vaccine for the COVID-19 virus, and that had Obama been in charge or Biden, we would never have gotten the vaccine that quickly. It would have taken years. It would have probably never happened. And that's what we're getting into now. We're going back to those days where you have this big, fat, corrupt, overstuffed government where people are making rules and laws outside of Congress and doing so based upon their own fat interests.
Right, and it's the ascension of identity politics, and the reason identity politics is so dangerous is because it's not liberalism; it's the antithesis of classical liberalism. It superimposes emotion where reason should prevail, and that's why you see why the Trump legal team failed in 60 of 61 courtrooms, because that's our legal system.
This is really shocking. I mean, I hope that we continue to research it. I just published a quick book, I cranked it right out on this subject called "We Are All Socialists Now," a deplorable looks at the 2020 election. And that we found out that not only was our media completely corrupt, there was no investigation of the voter fraud, other than scorn and mocking. No one looked at the affidavits. No one interviewed the people who were witnesses. No one really looked at the data abnormalities that occurred in those states. Nothing. Instead, they just simply heaped mockery on anyone who did. And then, of course, we expected to have an independent judiciary on the state and federal level, including the Supreme Court, who would actually hear this evidence and who would bring it into the courtroom where it could be discussed, it could be debated, it could be challenged. We could kick it around and find out what's real. That's what the court system is supposed to do. But the problem is it never reached that far, except in one case, and that was in Wisconsin, where a federal judge did hear the evidence that there were 125,000 ballots unlawfully cast. And his response to it was, well, yes, I see that, but I'm not going to rule on it because if I did, it might change the outcome of the election. So, talk about corrupt. I mean, that's like, having a murder trial and saying, oh, well, I'm going to throw this out because we all like this guy. He's popular. He's a rock singer. I don't know. So we're not going to look at the evidence because it's too controversial. I mean, it's just corrupt. It's rotten.
The corruption is so, and I think that's one thing that is shown. But again, we have such a divisive country that no matter how corrupt things have proven to be, the people, because of Trump's personality, because he caused this Trump derangement syndrome. The people that have Trump derangement syndrome literally don't care. They would have supported a military coup. They would have probably cheered if he'd been assassinated. Their hatred for him is beyond belief. They can make jokes about, at that time, his 10-year-old son being in a cage with pedophiles. They make fun of the most beautiful first lady we ever. I mean, just on the surface, she's a former supermodel. I mean, whatever you think.
And she was never featured on the cover of a major magazine.
Yeah,
and never interviewed. No one. It's the first time. I mean, every first lady, going back to Martha Washington, has had an interview where they ask, what is your favorite, meals, and how they talk about their hairstyle and their fashion. Nothing. No. There was no respect given at all. It was really despicable.
It wasn't, especially because of the fact and America is so superficial typically. So supermodels are not usually treated that harshly in the media. No. But to deny that she's attractive is absurd. And but that's what they do. They actually make fun of her wardrobe and stuff, which is try that with Michelle Obama. And see how far you get. I mean, really the double standard is ridiculous. But again, it's part of the left.
What do you think? What do you think happened? I mean, I think that I get the fact that there are two types of Trump haters. I mean, as I see it, there are the insider Trump haters. People like James Comey, and Brennan and Clapper. These are people who are conspiring to remove him from office, and because they didn't like his political agenda, not because they didn't like him personally. That doesn't matter. They did not like the fact that he was a nationalist, that he was putting America first. They are internationalists, they're globalists, and they wanted to see the United States continue on merging into a world order. And they were afraid that Trump was going to stop that. He was, and he was going to wake up the country. Plus, they had financial reasons for disliking him. And then you had the rest of the Trump haters, the people that you and I know, not the normies, as I like to call them. They're sucked in by this coordinated media attack, which they were conscious. People like, Rachel Maddow, she knows better. She's fully conscious. She's part of this attempt to destroy Trump for political reasons. But they get wrapped up in this drumbeat of propaganda and almost hypnotic attacks on him daily. And they come to hate him without knowing why. They cannot really articulate it. And the media totally lost its standard of reportage. They would report on one anonymous source. Then the next day they would extract the story in a small print, including the New York Times, and meanwhile the damage was done, and they came up with these false, ridiculous attacks, and they would act on them. I mean, the perfect phone call that led to the impeachment is a perfect example. I mean, it's just the most corrupt thing that I've ever seen. I remember all three networks did a major story on Donald Trump ordering an extra scoop of ice cream at a state dinner. Why was this a story? I mean, who cares? It's like this, somehow this is supposed to be seen as bad. Anyway, it's just, and meanwhile, there's real stories going on that were completely ignored.
No, again, it's all because his personality. The left is so inconsistent. The double standards are so glaring. But you can't. It doesn't matter. You can play. I mean, look, I posted something online last week or something where I have a pretty big following in social media, and I found a story about the Black Panthers. 24 fully armed Black Panthers with assault weapons marched into the Sacramento, California state capitol in 1967. State capitol. That looked a lot more like an insurrection than what we saw on January 6th. And this is during a time of real racism, when white privilege did exist, and when there were white supremacists. Everybody, that was a different time. What happened to us? Surely, I said, they must have been hung in the public square, executed on the spot. I mean, something must have happened, right? Nothing. The police calmly talked to them and took their weapons and sent them on their merry way. No, they didn't even get a fine. And I tried to, and all I got was no comparisons, apples to oranges. Well, yeah, it's no comparison because there are 24 black people with weapons. So you can't say anything because of political correctness. But if that was, if that was I said, what happened on January 6th, if nothing changed, everything else was identical, whatever it was, however many infiltrators, whatever it was, if the only thing that changed was that the people were there for a Black Lives Matter rally, and they marched into the Capitol under that banner, no one would. If you had called it an insurrection, you would have been called a traitor.
They last summer they burned St. John's Church down.
Yes,
which every president since Madison has prayed at that church. I think with the exception of Kennedy because he's Catholic. But and Trump went out for a show of force to say we're not going to be cowed by this. And he stood up and held up a Bible in front of it saying that this is a religious institution. And somehow they keep showing this as being something. But why? They don't explain why. It's just somehow because it's Trump, this is seen as something bad. It's almost like they're almost throwing up into our face the level of brainwashing. Anyways, Donald Jeffries, talk about your books and where people can find out more about your excellent work. You've got a fascinating shelf of books up there at Amazon Books.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to have another book coming out later this year, which is about showbiz.
Oh, good.
Hadn't been published yet, so I'm going to talk about corruption there. It'd be called On Borrowed Fame, but look for that down the road. But my latest book is Bullyocracy, about bullying in schools, how the social hierarchy enables bullies to rule schools, workplaces, and society at large. Very pertinent time, very relevant to today. Survival of the Rich is my economic book, and my two big sellers are Hidden History and Crimes and Cover-Ups, and I'll be working on Hidden History 3 as well. That's the ones people want. They love the conspiracy books about history. So they're easy to find. My blog is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. You can find me at Don Jeffries on Twitter. I'm easy to find out there. If you Google me, you'll find probably more than you want to.
All right. Well, Donald Jeffries, I want to thank you as always for joining me this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Charles.
All right. Take care.
Take care. You too.
All right.
Yeah, bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. And
Okay,
we've got coming up shortly, we have Michael Shaw will be joining us, as is the case. Every Wednesday, he usually comes on at 1 o'clock. Let me just go back to the Zoom meeting here, and we shall be in business. I basically shut that off only because I'm trying to tape that for the pre-records, and I want to here we go. Let me just see. I want to get that in the can for the pre-record, and then have Michael come on. Is he going to be joining us? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, excellent. Okay, come on down. Let me just get up. There we go. The technology is amazing when it works. There it is. All right, so Mike will be with us shortly. Anyway, look, I am an optimist. I am a pragmatist, and I am a hopeful. I'm hopeful as an American. I believe whatever happens, our republic is strong enough to withstand it, and we'll be okay. But having said that, I do think that, and as I mentioned this yesterday, that Biden as president wants to succeed, especially in the first 2 years of his presidency. And that means that he's probably going to preserve and maybe not advance, but he's going to preserve all of the excellent policies that were created by President Donald Trump, because they're good policies and because they're successful, and he wants to be successful. So maybe I'm being overly optimistic on that. That's a possibility. But I have to believe that. I really, I really feel that. Wait, let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's go to live on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, this process is absolutely amazing if it works, and it is working. Let me see if they're going to let me in. I'm terrible when it comes to IDs and logins. I keep having to reset them because I just don't. I don't keep as good a track as I should. Anyway, yeah, here we go. Okay, we are now on YouTube Live for part 2 of Charles Moscowitz Live. I want to thank everyone for joining me this afternoon, this inauguration day. You're welcome to join the conversation. We're doing an open lines program, and the phone number to do that is 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. Michael Shaw shall be with us shortly. He is a regular contributor on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern time now. And of course, we're talking about the inauguration. I want to reiterate that personally, as an American citizen, I congratulate the new president of the United States, Joseph R. Biden Jr., and the new vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, because I believe in our system. I believe I am moved by, and I am personally gratified by the fact that the transition took place peacefully. It took place in an orderly fashion. It took place without incident. And that, to me, is one of the great hallmarks of this great republic. The fact that we have that every 4 years, and have had that every 4 years since the inauguration of George Washington in 1790 on the balcony of the Federal Building in New York City. So I feel optimistic about this. I feel optimistic about how things will develop. Again, I think that has to do with the fact that the new president wants to be successful, especially in these difficult times, especially in these next 2 years as they look to a midterm election. And for that reason, I would contend, I would hope, maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, I don't know, but I'd like to think that he will continue with the excellent policies that were put in place by President Donald Trump, because they're good policies, because they're successful policies across the board. Now, it does look like he's getting rid of a few things. Maybe that's just boo bait for the bubbas. I don't know. Maybe that's real. If it is, it's troubling. I mean, it troubles me that he wants to rescind the Keystone Pipeline, which I think was just another move toward American, energy independence. Are we going to go back to, the old ways of doing things where, we have energy dependence? Also, he's going to stop construction of the border wall, which I think is a big mistake, especially as you have, you see the phenomena of the caravans moving north and heading for the border. I mean, is that really going to be a good thing? I can't imagine Biden wanting that to happen. That's not a good fit. Maybe, we can, I suppose, we can look at the conspiracy of it and say, well, he wants to have voters. I don't know. I mean, it's, I hope that that's not the case. All right. So Mike should be with us shortly, I hope. Mike, come on down. In the meantime, we are doing an Open Lines program here, and in that capacity, are welcome to join us. Here he is at 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958 is the number. Michael D. Shaw is not with us. Mike, thanks for joining me. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, always good to be here.
There we go.
Even on a day like this.
Well, look, it's I recognize, accept the new president and vice president as an American. And even though I would argue that the election was not legitimate, I think it was stolen. Nevertheless, he now has been sworn in, and I respect that.
Right.
And I want to see continuity in our election. I also, furthermore, am pleased that the election, that the inauguration happened without incident. It happened without any violence. And to me, that is the great hallmark of this republic, that every 4 years we have a new administration, whether it was reelected or new, that comes in peacefully. We don't have a violent overthrow. We don't have a coup d'etat in the violent sense. Now, we could talk about whether or not the process was a coup d'etat. I say it was. But the fact is, we're here. He's inaugurated. I wish him well because I want America to do well.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I mean, I have to look at it. I think I made the analogy last week that if there were a football championship that had some obviously bad calls and bad plays, but the score stands despite that, officially that team won the game. You may not want to personally accept it, but in the record books, even if it has an asterisk, that goes down as a W for that team.
Yeah, that's right. And that's sort of where I am at this point. Having said that, I will continue to seek out an investigation of the election. I'm going to be interviewing people as the weeks and months move forward on that. I hope that there is more exposure of it, because if we don't do that, in retrospect, we'll never have another free election. There are several things that I think have to happen right off the bat. And one of them is that this country has to get rid of the Dominion voting machines and all of electronic voting. Even if, the Dominion people are correct that there was no fraud, doesn't matter. It's too dangerous. It's unnecessary. Most nations in the world are not doing it, or they've rejected it. Most states in this country are not doing it, including Texas. And it's just the potential, even the image of it as being corrupting, is enough to say that they have to go completely.
Yeah, well, until you restore confidence in this process, there's going to be a cloud over not just this election, but any election.
Yeah.
And as I said some weeks ago, the notion of fraud explains a lot of things. For example, how did California become 150% blue despite having as late as 2011 a Republican governor, such as he was with Schwarzenegger? But nonetheless, how did it transform?
Right, overnight.
Hard rock blue state. So, but I'll tell you what disturbs me a little more even than this is this now notion of, so to speak, domestic terrorism. I mean, does it bother you a little bit that there's more troops in downtown D.C. now than there even were during the Civil War?
It's like it looks like a banana republic. It's like an occupation. It's very bad. And I think that it's greatly exaggerated. I don't like the fact that they're actually vetting troops. I think that the governor of Texas has said that he will not send troops again because of that, because, in order to become a National Guardsman, you have to sort of be vetted already. And what they're really doing is they're looking at people's ideology. And I hope that this isn't a harbinger of a left-wing element taking over the administration. I mean, I think that Biden himself is not mentally functionable enough to really be a strong president. I mean, I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that as an observer, which tells me that the people that are going to be in charge are the people that will be around him. And if they are moving in a left direction, then we're going to have big problems for people like me trying to do a radio program every day, and much worse for people who are, they were public Trump supporters. They're going to be blackballed. They're going to be shunned. They're going to be blacklisted. They're not going to be able to get jobs. They're, already at Harvard, you have a movement saying that people who were part of the Trump administration might have their diplomas taken away. I mean, this is, I don't know how far that's going to go, but I am really concerned about that. And I think that that's going to show in terms of whether or not the new administration is going to go Nazi. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, all signs are that it will. They're pushing the envelope. I mean, this talk of going into so-called domestic terrorism provisions is pretty scary. And it's one of these things that the human nature, in case people haven't noticed it, is such that no one really seems to object to anything. All right? Maybe some of these Harvard diplomas will be revoked, or whatever that means. But I think it's going to come down to it until it starts hitting just some common, everyday Johnny Doorknob guy. No one's going to care, as long as it's not happening to them.
Same thing happened in Nazi Germany. And isn't this what Minister Reinhold Niebuhr so famously said? They went after the communists, and I wasn't a communist. They went after the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, until they finally came after him. So there's
no one left to defend. I mean,
that's right.
It's been suggested that he really never said that, but
Right. Whatever. The point is that it speaks to what's going on.
Is certainly correct, and it is a bit frightening that they can get away with it so far. I mean, look at the deplatforming. What's in it for Amazon Web Services to cut off Parler like they did?
They have monopolistic control. I mean, we've talked. I mean, this is the very definition of fascism in that, and we should call it that. That, with the communist model is that the government and the state owns everything in the name of the people. The government is the corporation. The government is the property owner. Whereas the fascist model is that the government works as a partnership with select corporations, and they run everything, and that those select corporations are given privileges like monopolistic powers, and in exchange for supporting the government, and that they kind of go hand in glove. Like we could look at, for example, Mussolini's Italy. Instead of having a Congress or a parliament, they had a council of corporations who worked with Mussolini to run the country. So, and that was made up of select businesses. Nazism was the same. They had the Krupp, people, and they had IG Farben and, a bunch of others who basically were given monopoly powers and who ran their businesses and at the same time helped run the government. So I think that with the, with the power of Google and Apple and Twitter, they knew that they could get rid of Parler and there wouldn't be any opposition from the incoming administration. Now, that doesn't mean that the incoming administration outright is working with them, although a lot of their executives are now joining that administration. But it's by their inaction, by their essentially turning a blind eye, that they were able to do that.
Well,
get rid of their competition.
That happened, I think, yesterday was that this infamous Dr. Rachel Levine of Pennsylvania is now promoted to some high position in the federal government, despite doing a less than great job in her own state.
Well, let me just point out, and I did this in the first hour as well. This is the same Dr. Rachel Levine who pulled her 95-year-old mother out of a nursing home just before the state started putting COVID-19 active people in those homes. I hope that comes up in the hearings. I hope that we can get to the bottom of that rotten, genocidal policy that was conducted by certain states. In this case, Pennsylvania and New York and Michigan and California, probably Massachusetts, where they literally were putting COVID-19 active people in nursing homes. And more than 50% of the deaths in this country were from nursing homes. The inhumanity of that, the evil of it. And this was at a time when in New York State, they had the naval hospital ship off the coast.
Oh, yeah.
Empty. They could have easily put them in there. That's what it was there for, but they didn't.
But there's been coverage of it if you know where to look. But in the mainstream media, it wasn't covered. There's a narrative. But then going into that a little bit, I'm on an email group, and people had suggested that this is terrible. This is worse than it's ever been. But I pointed out I'm tired of this chronological snobbery that people bring up. The media has been left-wing for at least 100 years. Now, if you want to argue that there's more overt suppression, but the fact is, before the internet, there were no other means of getting this message across. How many people ever read the Spotlight newspaper? Maybe you never even heard of it.
Right. That was the Birch Society, right?
No, it was separate from the Birch Society. But the point is, there were organs out there that you could find alternative information, but it was very obscure. The Birch Society was absolutely tarred and feathered with an improper reputation.
Agreed.
But even so, if you were willing to seek that out, you could find it. So it's simply a matter of degree. The fact that people are noticing it now, well, that's very nice, but I don't think that helps the analysis. There's a lot of people caught in this sort of strange time war that if you remind them that Walter Cronkite, the so-called most trusted man in America, was a hardcore leftist. And how much more proof do you need when he called the Tet Offensive a loss when it was actually a victory? I mean, you can't get much more flagrant than that.
No, and I think there was none other than historian Douglas Brinkley, his main biographer, who kind of let the cat out of the bag on that one. I mean, he was, and yeah, I mean, back then, 1960s and into the 70s and even 80s, you had the source of information with just three major networks. They all basically were the same. They were all left of center. And the major newspapers, which were also mostly left of center, and you'd have some competition. Like in Boston, you had the Boston Globe, and you also had the Herald, which was a little competition, but
a little more conservative.
Yeah, that's right, just a slightly more. But for the most part, they controlled the high ground of the narrative. And now you had the internet, and there was all this hope that conservative opinion and alternative opinions would be heard. So it doesn't surprise me that they're moving in to crack down on that. And I remember early on in the development of the internet, this was like in 1999, 2000, Hillary Clinton, I think, who was first lady at the time, came out with some statements about the need to regulate the internet and to decide, what should be going over it. And I remember at the time, everybody was, oh, no, that will never happen, But I was thinking, I think it probably ultimately will happen, given the level of power that these people have, and the fact that they will not allow for a genuine free expression of ideas. And so that's where we are now. And the new administration is obviously completely on board with it. Biden, I didn't hear the inaugural speech. Did you hear it?
No, I couldn't quite bring myself.
Well, I caught some of it, and the little part that I heard, he already said right out there that we're going to go after quote unquote domestic terrorists and white supremacists. And so there it is. This is what we're looking at, and this is the using the Capitol incursion as the American version of the Reichstag fire. As I've said.
Well, how much of this domestic terrorist thing is going to be sort of false flag?
I think most of it is. I mean,
are they going to do this typical situation where you'd have a local Ku Klux Klan group where 80% of the members were actually FBI undercover agents?
Exactly.
And to stir up some controversy and so on.
Totally. I mean, I think I would argue that is probably what the whole Capitol thing was. And I think that as there is investigation, that's trickling out. And yet they use that as an excuse not only to impeach President Trump, but they're going to continue. That's like a gift. I mean, they're going to continue to bang that over our heads. And, I mean, it's sort of like what Rahm Emanuel said on the Sunday talk show right after Obama became president. You cannot let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And that's what this is. That's what we're looking at. The Reichstag fire in Germany took place a few weeks after the Nazis were elected, and Hitler used that as an excuse to suspend the German Constitution. Now, I don't think we're going to go that far in the literal sense, but in the de facto sense, they very well may. This is going to be, they have an enemy. They've claimed who that is. And they're going to, if they don't pull someone out from under a rock somewhere as proof, they'll make it up.
Yeah. Well, how far do you think it's going to go? I mean, at what point, if any, are people going to wake up? I mean, how much of this?
Well, I actually think that I'm somewhat optimistic about this, as I mentioned. I mean, I think that, Biden knows that the country is at least divided, if not that he lost. And I think he knows it. and so don't the people in power, because they're the ones who pulled this off. And because of that, and because of the upcoming midterms, I think they want to succeed, and they know that in order to succeed, they're going to have to leave in place President Trump's policies because they are successful, and that they're not going to be able to go with too big a stick at people.
Well, won't this cause a revolt by the more left-wing aspects of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think they're going to probably throw them a few bouquets. They're going to kind of do a few cosmetic things. It's kind of the way, in a way, some of the socialists worked in Western Europe, like Mitterrand or some of those people. They were, on the paper, they were socialists, and they might genuflect a little bit for them and do a few things. But for the most part, they kept the country moving as a capitalist country, and they kept, they were conservative in terms of their actual governing. And I think that at least for the first 2 years, maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think that Biden will do that because they want to succeed, and they want to see that their gains become stronger. And if and when that happens, then all hell breaks loose. I mean, in 2 years from now, if they win. So,
well, I mean, the other argument though is that you have some real fire breathers who may start an impeachment movement within their own party, because now impeachment is done at the drop of the hat.
Oh yeah, no, it's become like strictly a political football now. They can impeach. In fact, there's already a congresswoman from Georgia. Her name escapes me right now, Republican, who's going to be filing an article of impeachment against Biden tomorrow.
Yeah.
For the Burisma oil, the withholding aid until son of a bitch, they fired him. He did this on tape. I mean, he did on tape at a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations exactly what they falsely accused Trump of doing in Ukraine. And I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but if it's filed and if it leads to any kind of an investigation, I think that's going to be very serious. So yeah, I mean it's going to be constant impeachments. It's just that's what they have. Those are the seeds they sowed, and that's what they're going to reap.
Well, isn't it sad that the entire system was based on goodwill to some extent?
Sure.
And now it's being undermined, just like sort of anything else. I mean, the idea behind contract law is that if you have a contract with someone, it's fundamentally based on the goodwill between the parties.
Right.
Obviously, if something goes wrong, you'll litigate it. But the idea is that at least fundamentally, you were supposed to start off on some positive note. But on the other hand, if you go into it knowing that you're going to screw the other guy, then that really undermines the whole basis, going back to the impeachment thing, of constitutional government. If you're going to constantly pull.
No, our entire system is based on goodwill. I mean, our entire currency, our economic system, the value of the dollar is based on the trust of the American people in the American country, in our country. The good faith and credit, as they say, of the American dollar. It's very psychological. I mean, there's nothing real. It's not even backed by gold or any tangible assets. It's all based upon the good faith and credit of the American people and their faith in their government. That's the only reason why the dollar functions. And that's, as you say, that's why contracts function. There is a suspension of, each side compromises, they come up with an agreement, and they move forward based on good faith. So
taking the contract as an example.
Yeah.
What would happen to contract law if you decided to sue at the drop of a hat for every little thing? If your payment,
well, that's what they did for 4 years, and that's exactly. It's a great point.
If your payment terms were 30 days, and the guy paid you in 31 days, and you decided I'm going to sue him, and it's, I mean, think what this could mean.
It's a great insight. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what we could be looking at. And that's what they did to Trump. Every little turn, every little comment, every little nod. I mean, I can relate to it. Look, when I ran for for office myself in 2004 for Congress, I remember going to an editorial board meeting at a newspaper in my district that was completely hostile to me, waiting to get something on me. And I was there with my campaign manager, and you just sat there. I mean, even to like make a small sound, like if you made a little grunt, they would be there recording it. And it was every single question. It's like I'd have to whisper. We'd have to have a little conference, okay. And then we come back with, I mean, it was that brutal. There was absolutely no trust in the room at all. They were out to get me, and they were open about it. And that's the atmosphere that Trump existed in for 4 years.
Okay, but what motivated that? I mean, obviously they were for Barney Frank, but is that all they had against you? They
wanted to make sure that Barney Frank was reelected, and they just wanted to completely not take any chances and wipe me out as somebody who would dare to challenge him. I had people even say that to me. I remember I was out gathering signatures, and this guy says, "Well, I don't agree with you," and I said, "Well, fine. Don't you want to see an election where you have two sides on a ballot and there's a debate?" And he says, "No, I don't. I don't want anyone to oppose Barney Frank. I don't want you on the ballot. I'm going to work to make sure you don't get on the ballot."
What was the appeal of Barney Frank?
Well, he was kind of a cult figure. He was a hero of the left. I think the fact that he was openly gay was something that enhanced his cult appeal. My election would happen to be the year that Massachusetts declared gay marriage legal. And even though that wasn't a federal issue, and I kept pointing that out to people, that's all people wanted to talk about. What was my position on gay marriage? It was no other issue. And he was seen as the kind of the vanguard of that movement. So, plus he had, he was a cult personality. The Boston Globe had built him up, just like they had built up Michael Dukakis. That's how the left plays. They build these people up as these with hero worship. They keep writing about how brilliant they are. They're so brilliant. And people, and they control the high ground of our culture and our media. So they are able to do that. And they did not want somebody to come along and ask any hard questions or challenge him. So they had to demonize me, and did. But anyway, and that wasn't too difficult.
But you're better for the experience now.
I mean,
you're a hardened warrior.
They looked at everything I'd ever written, and some of the things I had written were not necessarily, things that I necessarily agreed with at the time. And that's politics. It's not beanbag, as they say. It's a tough game. So
okay, but besides waiting for 2022, what should the good guys do now?
Well, I mean, I think we have to continue to come up and out and expose the voter fraud and not give up on that. We have to call for a national ID. We should note that in October, Pelosi's Congress recommended a $1.5 trillion stimulus package, allegedly to help businesses deal with the COVID-19 crisis, even though there was very little in there for that. But one of the items in that package was, I think it was at least like $10 billion for election reform. Now, what does that mean? I mean, it's payoffs to their friends, helping them steal elections. But putting that aside, if they can put up that kind of money or advocate that kind of money to help reform our election system, then they could put up a fraction of that to ensure that every American can get access to a free and easy ID card to show that they are who they are when they vote. And, I talked about this in the first hour with Donald Jeffries, and I'm going to reiterate it now. The reason why they didn't get a national ID card or even, run by the states for voter ID was because there was this phony turf, group funded by George Soros called the Brennan Institute. It was made up of left-wing lawyers who dressed very conservatively, and they put on gray suits, and they spoke in home, and it was completely phony. And they came up with a paper illustrating with very phony, research, that to have voter ID meant you were racist, is something against black people. And it was completely false, and yet they were able to pull it off, and it became a mantra. And it's actually a very racist mantra. What are they saying? That a black person can't get a voter ID? I mean, everyone can get ID. You can get ID to buy groceries. You have to have an ID to buy booze. You have to have ID to buy a lottery ticket. We all need ID to get through, any kind of, most transactions, you often need to have in the course of life an ID, and that includes everyone. So the idea that a black person can't get an ID is false and ridiculous. And I would suggest that to further show the lie of that, the ID should be free. There very well may have been some states that were charging a lot of money for it. I don't know, but it should be free and it should be easy to get. And so between that and getting rid of the electronic machines and ensuring that the vote, that the states legislators reassume and assert their constitutional prerogative to make voter laws, which was completely subverted under the guise of the COVID-19 virus by the so-called swing states, where you had governors and judges and even bureaucrats making up laws right before the election and even after the election, all to favor Biden and to weaken ID. You have legislators making the laws. You have, when the vote is counted, people at the table on both sides. You have the media there. Everything is done out in the open. Everything is observed. You have the states purging their voter lists of people who either had passed away or who were no longer in the state. We know that in Nevada, there was a lot of corruption around that. And I think in Arizona too, where you had people voting from the grave. People like to make a joke about that, but that is an issue. It doesn't take brain surgery to have a team of people in a state double checking the voter rolls. It's not that difficult. They exist. You just call someone up. You have some kind of a means to confirm that this registered person is the same person that's on the voter rolls. This isn't, in Georgia, for example, there were two counties that wanted to do this. They wanted to get rid of all the names on their voter lists who were either had passed away or who left the state. And they were prevented from doing so by a federal judge who happens to be Stacey Abrams' sister. And so, this is corrupt. You have to have, these are basics. So we can then get back to an idea that was very championed back in the 1960s by the civil rights movement and was supposed to be enhanced by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was signed by Lyndon Johnson, and that is to adhere to and enhance the principle of one man, one vote, and not anything else. So we have to get back to that. So that's the big cause, I think, one of the big causes that I'm going to be focusing on this year.
I think that's a good idea, but the trouble is that there's such a corrupt infrastructure, and I think it's, at the end of the day, based primarily on not having term limits. Look at what happened to Mitch McConnell, for God's sake, who's now a proponent of impeachment. There are very few guys left standing who are still pro-Trump because they're going along with the establishment. And the whole notion that this all disappears, maybe not amongst the 75 million people who voted for Trump, but certainly within establishment government, is just appalling to me. That you could name Jim Jordan and Marjorie Greene and a few other people, but everybody else has folded. And it's so disheartening. There's newspaper columnists that have folded, that were pro-Trump, but now I guess they realize what's
Well, they still want to keep. They want to
to
keep a job. They want to be. They want to get invited to the talkies. You know, everybody jumps ship. You know, toward the end because they want to have a future. It is disgusting, but that's what's happened. And as far as term limits, I don't know. I'm of mixed mind on that. I tend to lean toward it at this point. I didn't used to be, but I think you make the good point, Mike, in that you know when you're in office for that long and you keep perpetrating your position of staying in office,
right.
you become beholden to all these special interests and these lobbyists who keep you in office by giving you money so you can constantly be running again. And that maybe it would be and by the way, the Congress gave itself incredible perks if you stay in office. If you get to the magic number of serving 3 terms,
Right.
you are vested for life. I mean, you've got, you know, a full pension and you got full health benefits and full this, full that, you know, it's like you're set for the rest of your life. That, you know, getting rid of that would be, you know, probably good because then you can have new people come up every 2 years and you'd have people stepping down and giving someone else a chance. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good development. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are other things that maybe are not good with that because if someone stays in long enough, they can get influence that can help your state and your district. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's a complicated question.
Right, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule. And I've known specific members, I may have mentioned this, that finally quit in disgust after a couple of terms. Scott Riggle of Virginia, the southern part of Virginia. I worked with him on Chinese drywall, and he just got so tired of the BS that he just didn't run. I believe it was the 3rd or the 4th time, and he felt it was just better to go back into the private sector. And, you know, you have to ask the question, you look at the so-called good guys like Jim Jordan, what's the motivation to be surrounded by a brood of vipers? Is it just so you can somehow egotistically say you're the good guy? Would you want to be in a situation where 95% of the people were trash, but you could go home every night and tell your wife, I'm the good guy in that group?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for like keeping the thing moving and bringing in regular people, and you know, it kind of would probably reduce the power of the lobbyists because you know, it would, in a sense, you know, you'd have people who actually, if there was more of a turnover, you would have people who didn't necessarily have a big name. Now, you know, one of the things I've tried to encourage people to do also, and I will continue to in these times, because one of the lessons we learned from this is that state legislators have a lot more power than they think they have. They are the elected body of the people. That is where law is supposed to be made, not by governors, not by judges, not by bureaucrats, not by unelected officials, which has been the trend since Wilson. And that I would urge people listening to this program to run for their local, state, rep, or Senate office. You may find that whoever's holding that office has been there for decades and never had any opposition. You know, it's time to get in there. And in these districts are small enough. I mean, usually a state rep district is maybe 1 or 2 towns.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have a lot of money to do it. You don't have to get a lot of signatures to get on the ballot. It's usually maybe 100 signatures. And you can win by going door to door. You don't need, and you can win by using free media like cable television in your community and Facebook and all these social networks. And you can start to go out and meet people. You know, this is something that I've urged. If you're a housewife, if you're an empty nester, your kids are off to college and you have some time, you're retired, you know, if you have any extra time, if you're a teenager, you can do it and you can win. And even if you don't win, you're going to get interviewed by the local press and you're going to be able to talk about a couple of issues that you care about and you're going to bring them up in a way that could make a big difference. I mean, look, I did this myself. So, I mean, I'm speaking for experience. And I'll point to the great book written by Tip O'Neill of Massachusetts. He, all politics is local. And he talked about how in the 1950s, he ran for Congress in Somerville and Cambridge. He was not well known. He was opposed by the Kennedys, who had all the political power in the state. They didn't like him. And we all love and hate the Kennedys in Massachusetts, but back then they had a powerful machine. I mean, John Kennedy was senator, and he did it by going door to door, and it took him about a year. But he actually, every day, he would put time aside and he would knock on doors in each and every neighborhood in that district. And by the way, he was not a man of great health either. He was very overweight, but he was able to do it and he won. And that's how you do it. It can be done by anyone on a shoestring. You don't need a lot of money. These are small towns.
Okay, but are you conflating the local congressional district with the local, I don't know what you call it in Massachusetts, the equivalent of our House of Delegates in Virginia?
Yeah, the House of Delegates, the House of Burgesses, I think they call that in Virginia.
No, that would Patrick Henry, but
okay.
No, now it's
House of Delegates.
House
Exactly,
of Delegates.
the state legislature. Every state has one.
You're exactly right, because the guy that represents my area has been in for something like 210 years.
Michael, why don't you run?
Why don't I run?
Yes. Why don't you run for state rep in your district? Run against him. You could do it.
Well, the district is overwhelmingly Democrat.
Doesn't matter. You can, anybody can do it. Even if you don't win, you will be interviewed by the press. You should, look, let's talk about this because I could use you as a template for anyone who's listening.
All right.
You you simply file with your local Republican Party, or you can go as an independent. Yeah. And then you get a status where you can start to raise funds. You don't have to do a lot. We're not talking about a lot of money here. We're talking about, I think the average state rep, state Senate run, it might cost maybe at most $20,000.
Yeah.
You basically bring in a media person maybe to help, and you start to go door to door. You start to send out press releases, which you could write yourself. You go to the cable station. If you can't get on someone else's show, you simply sign a one-page document requesting your own show. You go on cable. You host the show once a week where you talk about issues, maybe interview people. That'll give you some recognition because they run that show. By the way, cable is one of the great secrets of political life, and I did it, by the way, and it was very effective in that you do once a week, you do like a half hour or an hour show, and they keep rerunning it all week because they need content. So after maybe a month or two of that, everyone in that town is going to know who you are because everyone will have seen it. And you set up a Facebook page, a Twitter account, all that.
Right, but I mean, in your case, you ran for federal office.
Right.
Presumably because you felt that there were bigger issues.
Right. I was interested in national issues.
Yeah, and then worrying about what streets are going to be paved in Brookline.
Right. That's right. That's right. But look, you have to start somewhere. There are state issues that are interesting. I think Virginia, don't they have, in Massachusetts, they just passed a law that enhances abortion to the point where they're talking about the after the birth. Why Massachusetts needed a new abortion law at this time? All of a sudden, there's this urgency to, we've had legal abortion in Massachusetts since Roe versus Wade. It's not like suddenly. The point is that could be an issue. There are other issues.
In fact, Virginia is going much more liberal with the gun laws.
Even if they're liberals, you could ask people, go door to door and say, look, is this something you actually believe in?
Yeah.
You'll find that liberals, your average person may not. They may take a second look. You've got a hardcore liberal, but people can be influenced. And even if you don't win, you're going to get interviewed by the local press and you're going to be able to discuss these issues. and it will make a difference. People will think about it. It'll bring a shine of light.
Of course, in the case of the local district here, you could have a big argument. This guy's been in office for 100 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You take a look at his record, do an analysis. You could go do some research at the state, look at how his voting record looks. I did it with Barney Frank. Of course, after I did it, it's interesting. The Congress made it more difficult to look at people's records. I don't think it was because of me, but there's a couple of people that did this. But you can look at his record and find some real whoppers in there in terms of stuff he voted for or against. Bring that up. That's politics. But even if generally my advice to anyone listening who's thinking of doing this, you have one or two, maybe at most 3 issues. No more. Keep it very simple and keep pounding away at those issues and keep going out and meeting people face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and ask them what's on their minds. It's an incredible experience. And you'll find that there'll be housewives who will be willing to host a little coffee party for you where you'll bring neighbors in and you'll make a little speech, raise a little money, build the organization. And, it's a great thing to do if you have some time. It takes about a year and, it is very winnable. It's something that, if you're careful about how to go about it, you can do it. And you're not going to get likely, the big guns to come down heavy on you because it's not a big race.
Yeah.
These are local races. You're not going to have, the left wing come in and start to do a deep investigation on you because they're not paying attention. It's a local thing. I mean, look, if there's something, a good idea, I just should say this, is that if you're nervous about something coming out about you, whether it be in your business life or your personal life, then it's, something that some people do is it's not a bad idea. You actually hire a private investigator to investigate yourself.
Yeah.
And find out if anything that you may not want to be known is out there. I mean, look, it's an ugly business and that's just the way it is. And then once you get a full report on yourself, then you can figure out whether or not it's worth it or if these are things that you can answer to or whatnot. But, it's not a bad idea to know this. I mean, I kind of knew going in, stuff like that. So, whatever. I mean,
well, devil's advocate, though, you never ran again.
No. Well, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I'm not prepared to even discuss. And then probably.
Oh, right. I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, but there were things that happened that were really unpleasant during that election to me personally and to me professionally that I don't,
this is why one reason why people may not want to do it.
Yeah, but what I would say to that is that, I took on a very big apple. I mean, I went to a national race. I had never had any experience. And I took on an icon, somebody who was revered nationally. So that's not what we're talking about here. I'm not suggesting people do that. I'm saying do a local race, local state rep, state senate.
But here's the point.
And you're not going to get that kind of attention, likely.
Right. Who's my local congressional guy? Is Jerry Connolly.
Okay.
He's a lefty. He was with the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors before. But here again, maybe he doesn't have the charisma of Barney Frank, but the argument is, hey, this guy has been in office. He's known. Why should we get this guy out for you? So the incumbency is often a big advantage for these people.
Can be.
Even if they don't have any charisma. And believe me, Connolly has no charisma.
Has he had any serious opposition?
No.
Well,
No,
I mean,
because you're in a district that's
then you draw him in and you ask them,
95% Democrat.
Fine. You draw him in. You ask for debate. You get the media to ask him to debate you. You get him to talk to you publicly. You get him to respond to you publicly. And if he doesn't, then you just keep the pressure on by contacting people locally and building your base. And eventually he's going to have to pay attention. And once he does, then you have a real race. I mean, look, Barney Frank immediately paid attention to me. and we had, and that put me on the path. I mean, that's so you kind of bring them into like the arena of debate. And
well, here's what happens in this district. Okay, the local Republican Party will put up some. It's always the same resume. Some business guy, preferably slightly ethnic, who's been doing some local business for 20 years, and he's going to take this business acumen and bring it to Congress.
Sure.
And it's sort of the same template. But I think it might even be purposeful, is they don't want to find anybody with charisma. They want to find some dull, boring guy
a rubber stamp.
Nothing in their past.
Yeah, they want a rubber stamp. They want to have somebody that's just going to be like a Manchurian candidate. I mean, that is the typical. Look at Biden. I mean, they want to have somebody that, oftentimes, I mean, when you get to that level, you have someone who, frankly, can be blackmailed. There's skeletons in the closet, and they were very ambitious, and they cut a few corners to get where they are.
Yeah.
And thus they are controlled. That's why they hated Trump. Everything about Trump, including the ugly stuff, was all out there, and he wasn't beholden to anybody. He didn't need any money. He was rich. He didn't have to, he wasn't trying to grab a few bucks on the side. It's like he wasn't able to, they weren't able to control him. So they couldn't, he couldn't be managed. But most of these people have something like that. Not so much on the local level. Again, we're talking local politics. I don't
know. Sometimes I think the only way you're going to break this is if you have a Trump-like character who runs as an independent and somehow builds his own organization. So now you're really giving the middle finger to both big parties.
Yeah. I mean, Trump did change politics. I mean, he did show.
Well, just imagine what would happen if an independent won the presidency.
Look, if I had known about Trump when I ran, and if there was a Trump-like figure, I would have done things differently. Yeah. But I was locked into the way things were done,
of course,
at that time. But the thing is that nowadays, with Trump having changed the way things are and the way we communicate, you don't have to be constrained by these kind of niceties. You can go out and speak your mind and be blunt and talk about issues that you care about. And it doesn't take much. You can win on a shoestring. People have won elections with no money just because they went out, they brought up a few issues that people connected with. They said, yeah, I agree with that. And then in the quiet secrecy of the voting booth, they vote for you.
It was this guy, I don't remember his name, in North Carolina, lieutenant governor, I think, who ran he was in the Republican Party, but he was some unknown guy. And he was up against quite a bit of opposition, and he won.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Look at Sandy Cortez. She was a nobody, and she won against one of the biggest Democrat incumbents. And she did this. Look, I don't like her politics, but she went out and she met people and she worked the streets and had the little coffee clutches and built a base and didn't do. I don't think she had a lot of money behind her. She resonated because she connected with people on the far left, and they went out and they voted. So
people on the far left, and she had this ethnicity.
Right. So fine, she played the race card. Whatever it is. I mean, in your case, I mean, you take a look at the conditions of your small district. What do people care about? You could do a little canvassing. Do some polling. Find out. What are some issues that people actually are thinking about in your district? Do a little research. Maybe do some meetings with people. Just do some studying and find out and then you distill a handful of issues, 2 or 3, no more, and go for it.
Yeah, in Northern Virginia, you have some unique problems because this is the home of all the Beltway bandits. So there's a large number of people,
government employees,
who are tied into the government.
Yeah.
It turns out it's even more so in across the river in Maryland, Prince George's County.
Sure.
Where some humongous percentage of those people work for the government. much higher than infringement.
Well, you're probably not going to reach those people, and you know, in a sense, when you run, you have to kind of, while you don't want to alienate anyone, you have to kind of take a look at what is going to be your base and focus on them, and not put a lot of energy into trying to convince, you know, government swamp rats to vote for you, because they ain't going to do it. It's like it's an exercise in futility. It's like I told conservatives to not waste their time with the Jewish vote, because they're not going to vote for you. You could be, you know, if you were Adolf Hitler and you were in the Democratic Party, the Jews would vote for you. You know, why waste your time? And that's a realistic.
Well, by the way, that's how Henry Waxman stayed in office for 30-something years. The Republicans never put up a candidate against him.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was one case, I don't remember the name of the guy, who on his own was so tired of Waxman being the representative that he self-funded a campaign. And he ended up getting 20-something% of the vote, just as some Johnny doorknob guy no one's ever heard of. So you'd think, well, wait a minute, if that guy had some money behind him, he may have done something. But there you go. So
I mean, people have weird ways of staying in office. I mean, there's a legendary Francis Donovan of Massachusetts who stayed in office for 20 years, didn't do a damn thing, but he did it because every day he would take orders from his constituents for Jordan Marsh blueberry muffins. And he would go to the State House, then he'd go to Jordan Marsh, he'd buy the blueberry muffins and bring them back, and he would deliver them. And people loved him for that. I'm just, you know, it's like,
how many muffins did he have to get?
He'd probably different amounts every, you know, he'd bring them regularly. I don't know the details, but I know that he did this, and he ingratiated himself with his district that way. So people have.
So what? He just retired or died or?
Yeah, he just retired. I think after 20 years, I probably died in office. I don't know. This was in the 60s. Jordan Marsh no longer exists, although they say that there is a company that has the secret recipe for the muffins. I don't know. So the point is that what?
It was just
muffins. Oh, they were great muffins. No, the blueberry muffins, they were legendary.
Better than the pewter pot?
Yeah. I mean, there was something about it.
You remember the pewter pot?
Of course, well, the pewter pot was very popular with Catholics after Mass. They would mob into the pewter pot.
Yeah. Whatever happened to that chain? I remember when I was a student in Boston.
Yeah.
Many years ago. Mug
and Muffin was another one. They're all gone. That's like a bygone era.
Oh man. I remember that. I mean,
sure. They used to fry the They would take the blueberry muffins and they would fry them on the grill. It was really good with butter. I mean, it's, you know, probably everybody who had that regularly is dead now. I mean, it's not exactly healthy. But
no, but the memory was. I lived in the North End that year. I remember the winter was very cold and severe.
Yeah.
And a couple of us guys would walk across Beacon Hill, Boylston Street, and we'd be cold as can be. You know, then we get into the pewter pot. This hot coffee and that hot muffin. And boy, this was great.
Oh, it was part of the culture. I think they're all gone now.
Oh.
It's all been replaced by Starbucks.
Yeah.
Where they charge you $5 for like basically a cup of sugar water.
Well, I have to tell you a Starbucks story. This surprised even me.
Yeah.
And I'm a world-class cynic, right? At my gym in the same center, and of course in Virginia the gyms are open. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the government, right?
Yes. Well, they didn't want a mass riot. So
sure.
All right. So anyway, the typical thing would be you do your workout, go down to Starbucks, which is right there, and get whatever you get. And then for whatever reason, they closed that location. Boom. All right. Across the way is a Panera Bread.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out they have a better deal. I'm not trying to do a commercial for them.
No, not at all. I like Panera.
But the better deal was for $9 a month, you have a coffee subscription unlimited.
Wow.
So do the math. You
sure.
go to Starbucks, $2.50 each. Okay. So I thought, well, this is crazy.
Mhm.
All the Starbucks people are going to go right over to Panera Bread, right?
Sure.
No,
No, they didn't do it.
no, they found another Starbucks.
I know there's something about Starbucks. I don't know what they put in that stuff, but it's. I mean, I like Starbucks. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I stopped drinking the sugar drinks because
Yeah.
my daughter basically said, if you stop drinking those drinks, you're going to lose a lot of weight, and I did.
Oh,
So she was right, because if you have the sugar in the drink, it goes right. It completely turns into fat. At least if you have like a muffin, you're having food with the sugar, so it has to digest. But if you drink the sugar in a drink, it's total fattening.
that's right.
So she's
By
right
the
about
way,
that.
is
Yeah.
your daughter ever going to be on the show?
Never.
Oh.
Private. We're talking about very private people. That
Okay.
in fact they don't want to have anything to do with it.
All right.
Anyway, but Mike, we should have you run for office. It could be a great experiment.
Yeah, you know, the stress may be too much. I don't know.
You'll love it. You'll have a great time. You know, it's exhilarating. I mean, especially for a local office, because there's not a lot of controversy. You're not going to have anybody gunning for you. Not likely. You know, you'll just be there going a little under the radar, bringing up your issues, taking on the guy, you know, and you know, you might win, and you could very well win.
Well,
You'd
I mean,
be surprised.
to be honest with you, I wonder if I have the energy at this point.
Oh, you'll find the whole experience to be very energizing. And you know, if you win, then you can go to the State House and start to say, look, let's reassert our powers as a state legislature, and
Yeah.
start to take back our ability to regulate things like elections and a lot of other stuff that's been usurped by the governor and by judges and by everyone else.
Well, certainly food for thought.
Do it. Do it.
I would try to find a clone of myself who's someone younger.
No, you're right. You're just the right age. You need someone who's.
Well, I don't know about that.
No, it's good to have a few gray hairs. You know, you should do
How
it.
about white hairs?
Fine. That's perfect. I remember this guy that was running locally. He was like in his 80s, and his opponent was a very young guy. He was like late 20s, and he. I don't think he won, but he had a great time, and he made a lot. And they had funny jokes about the age difference, and I mean, it's fine. You know, I say go for it.
Hey, maybe I'll think about it.
Okay. Well, we'll have to check in and see.
Then,
Until then, think about it. I'll check in with you next week to see what your thoughts are. I'm serious. Go for it. And I urge other people, this is how we're going to take back the republic. You know, this is where the power is at the state legislative level. And by the way, Republicans have taken back at least 2 state houses,
I mean,
including New Hampshire.
The point that you're making is that people have to stop complaining about it and try to do something.
Exactly. It's a civic duty. It really is. You know, we can have a purpose. You know, as Americans, we think that, you know, freedom grows on trees and that everything is fine. It doesn't. You have to exercise the levers of freedom. You have to get involved, and, you know, otherwise they atrophy. You have to go out and actually use the apparatus that's there. Otherwise, it's going to get very rusty. Anyways, Mike Shaw, what are you working on? What do you have up in terms of an article?
All right. You're going to love this. A survey just came out. I'm going to be writing about it. Attitudes toward the vaccine.
Okay.
Spoiler, 47% of the people do not want to take the vaccine. 47%.
That's very high.
And a lot of reasons why. Even 33% of those of us over 55. No, there's been, frankly, a few too many side effects that they've been kind of blowing off. And it's a troubled introduction. As I told my wife, the thing that bothered me the most was, because I was on this during the early stages, they were talking about 3 boosters, giving it in 4 stages. Then they realized the logistics of that are going to be tough. So then they brought it to 2. And I think what's happening is the dose is too strong.
Okay.
And that's why people are getting these reactions. And There are some people dying from this thing,
No, that's true.
and we'll see. But it's amazing. I've never seen a vaccine with this kind of public rejection before. So somebody did a very detailed study. I was able to get a hold of it. They just posted it today, and I think they still got like.
Where did this poll take place, by the way, Mike?
It's. Do I still have it up here? Let's see. You know what? I took it off my main browser.
Okay.
Away, but they. It's a nationally recognized outfit.
Okay.
That they went into the ethnic side of it, all kinds of demographics.
Yep.
And it is interesting.
No, we'll have to keep an eye on it. I mean, it's all being rolled out. I know that certainly the media is touting it as being this great thing, and they keep showing constantly people getting the shot. That's like every day we see it. So, which makes you suspicious, quite honestly. But anyway, all right, Michael Shaw.
Right,
listen, I want to thank you as always.
We will
continue to see where we are.
do it again.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike. Talk to you soon.